Hello and welcome to Lessons from the Trenches in LLM Frontier, an engineer's perspective. My name's Dasith Wijesiriwardena. I've got Juan Burkhardt and Jason Goodsell here with me as well. We are a team of engineers from Industry Solutions Engineering in Microsoft. Um, we are presenting ourselves here. We are not representing Microsoft's opinion. These are our own opinions. So, with that out of the way, we have been working with Microsoft strategic customers for the last year in Australia, mostly helping them with large language model solutions because that's been the hot topic in 2024. And we've got some lessons to share with you, especially for teams starting up developing some of these exciting solutions. And hopefully, you can take something to your team after this talk. The agenda for today is to talk about how to start from zero, what you will need, the kind of mindset changes that you'll need to make when you're developing LLM applications. And then Juan will talk about LLM ops and what that means in terms of experimentation and how you need to incorporate this into your flow. And then Jason will touch on retrieval augmented generation and why it's not always as rosy as everyone seems to think. It's easy to get started, very hard to master, and get it safe to use in production. And I'll close off with some of the things that can go wrong and will go wrong, and what you can do as an engineer to and as your team to reduce some of the risks when developing enterprise solutions running in production. So to get started, I'll talk about the need for cross-functional teams. As you know, we went through this DevOps transformation maybe, I don't know, a decade ago, and we started looking at putting cross-functional teams in, and these lessons still apply when doing large language model development. You absolutely need engineers. You need data scientists because they will allow you to frame your questions the right way, do the experiments in a scientific way, and subject matter experts will allow you to give business value back and not build some gimmicky LLM application. So, and the platform engineer, of course, allow you to have build observability and run these expensive solutions in production. And the big thing here is the need for a mindset change because when you're developing classical software, your software will generally do what you tell it to do. It won't do anything outside of that. That's kind of the mindset you have. But with Gen AI solutions, generally, because the LLMs are kind of a black box, they will do everything you ask them, unless you ask them not to. So it's a very different mindset going into these things when it comes to risk, and it requires continuous attention, like one of my colleagues explained to me, like taking care of a puppy. So keep these things in mind when you're going in to this land of the unknown that is LLM development. And when building LLM solutions, these three topics will generally come up if you're doing it in enterprise, especially. I'll start with experimenting. You need subject matter experts, like I said, to make sure that you're getting the results back and you're mapping it to business value because you don't want to build some gimmicky LLM solution. And here's where the label data and production data, if you've got that available already, will come in real handy because it will allow you to give out do tangible experiments. And if if you've got many teams building Gen AI gateways, you're probably going to have Gen AI solutions, you probably need a Gen AI gateway that gives policy-based access to different workloads, and it must be simple to consume and it will be observable solution. It must be observable solution. And for data curation, structured documents and relevancy search is important. The last thing I'm going to touch on before I hand over to Juan is whether you should use agentic framework. Now, there's a lot of things out there. LangChain is many things. It can do agentic frameworks as well, but there are other mature things as well. But my argument here and the team's argument is if you're just like microservices, you're not going to need it at the start unless you're got very special use cases. So stay away from them. That's been our experience. Build something simple because at the end of the day, it's LLM call to it's a prompt that goes in and a response you get back. You're not going to need all of this complexity. So earn the complexity. Maybe later on when it gets to a certain level of maturity, you might consider this, but not at the start. Now to talk about some of the things around LLM ops and what that means to you, I've got Juan.
Thanks, Das. Hi, everyone. Today I will be talking about LLM ops. It's one of those topics that's really hot, and we have been learning from them in every single engagement. So I will start with what it is, then I will move into why it was needed or why it is needed, and then I will jump into give you an example of the implementation and some of the gotchas on it. So let me start with what it is. So if you see the definition, Das, can you go to the previous slide? If you see the definition, it is exactly, or it looks really similar to the definition of DevOps. I could perfectly swap the word LLM ops for DevOps in here, and it will work. All right. So at the end, all that it's doing is helping you ship code to production and run it in there. So why is it new? Das, can you go to the next slide, please? It's mostly because of the nature of generative AI applications. If you read on the slides, you can see some of their characteristics, but let me give you an example and flag them, right? So if you know what an LLM does, all that it tries to do is guessing the next token. It doesn't know, it guesses the next token. So if I give you an example, as in what is the best place to go on vacations? Or better, the best place to go on vacation is token, right? So the LLM will say something like, let's go to the beach or go to the office or go to the mountain, right? From there, what you can see is that it's not deterministic and it's biased. It depends who trained it, where are the balances around, why it selected, I don't know, mountain over going to the ocean, right? So you can see it's biased. Also, you can see that from that, there's some ethical implications. What you will say to person X. That means that you will have to put some controls. We'll talk about guardrails at the end, but you can imagine you will need to add some controls. And regarding context aware and data drifts, I'll give you an example. The same example, let's say the best place to go on vacation for a person that likes snowboarding is token. You can see I drove it into a path, right? So you can see that the context given to the LLM changes where it goes, right? Regarding data drift, you can imagine if your response or you are augmenting knowledge with some of your documents, if the documents get updated or obsolete, it will change how your model works, right? Or even the model can get more details, right? So that's the nature of generative AI applications. So why it was needed, why you need LLM ops, and what is the new thing that makes it interesting? So if you go to the next slide, it's the continuous evaluation and continuous experimentation. So let's see an example of an implementation. Here you see talk with an implementation of talk with your data. I won't go into details of each one of these steps here, but what I want you to see is on the left side, you have the inner loop. The inner loop has the experiments and evaluation. That's critical. If you don't have that, that's the difference between, hey, the application works and it works sometimes, right? You will need to create a baseline. You will need to maintain the application and make it better, right? So for that, what you would do, you will run experiments against your application. You get a baseline. Let's say it's accurate 80% of the time. And then if you update the application, you don't want any regression. Also, on the right side, on the outer loop, you can see we talk about the data collection and feedback. This is critical. The questions that you have in your data set for the evaluations are not the same questions that are happening in production. So having that feedback to update your data set for evaluations is critical. I'll Sorry, one more thing. When you are turning back, right, you will have to have some engineering skills here, right? So imagine that you want to see thumbs up and thumbs down to see your answer, right? That's how you collect data. You could also have A/B testing, right? Present answer one and answer two, and see what the person selects. Finally, does it copy the text? If you copy a text, it's useful, right? So That's critical. Let me jump to what are the gotchas, or let me jump to the next slide. What are the things to keep in mind when you're going back to your teams? Prepare your data. If you don't have clear data and in, in basically ground truth, you need to have data to be able to evaluate your LLM application. Identify the metric. Your best friend is going to be a data scientist and SME. Find what is the metric that you want to maximize. You will need to focus on the return for investment in this aspect. Feedback loops, I mentioned them. Observability is critical for this. You need to get what is happening in production. Iterate quickly. I cannot make this more clear. You need to automate. Your application is going to keep moving. And lastly, consider the cost. When you add every call to the LLM, is going to add your cost and latency. So keep an eye on the cost. And I think the last slide is just because you just don't deploy and leave it. But I'll hand it over to Jason now.
Sweet, thank you, Juan. So I'm going to be talking about RAG. It's kind of complicated. Go to the next slide, please. So what is RAG? RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. There might be times or situations where you want to implement an LLM, but the LLM wouldn't know necessarily any internal private information that's relative or relevant to your organization. So what I guess what are sort of ways that you can go about it? You can train your own LLM, but that's sort of costly, time consuming. You need to have the skills and the data science and the preparation and all that in place. Not very ideal. You could fine tune a LLM based on your data set, based on your knowledge bases. But again, that's time consuming, costly, need skills and all that. So that's where RAG comes in. RAG is a really cheap, really fast way to go from zero to hero. It's basically like giving your LLM a cheat sheet on the information relevant to the query or to the prompt that the user is given. It sort of just bridges the gap between having an LLM that's all knowing and it not like providing it like existing knowledges from your internal data sets. And yeah, it sounds all rosies and it sounds like it's pretty simple and straightforward, right? But there's a couple of things that you need to be wary of. For one, your data set is constantly in flux. Like when you implement your RAG today, 12 months from down the road, things like within your data set could have changed dramatically. You could have, you might have to reevaluate how you retrieve the relevant knowledge from your internal data sets. You may need to readjust your chunking strategy because LLMs have a token limit within the context window, so you may need to reevaluate that sort of aspect. And the whatever your data set is, like if it's not in a place where it's retrievable, easily found, easily brought up, if it's not ordered in a way where you can retrieve the relevant context for the given query, you're gonna have a bad time. It's basically garbage in, garbage out. So you still need all that data preparation ahead of time to make sure that whatever solution that you've implemented, it can retrieve the right sort of information based on the user query. Next slide, please. So I guess some key takeaways I want to emphasize. You basically need to reevaluate the precision. How you're retrieving information and the faithfulness to that information that you're retrieving very early on in your engagement. You want to make sure that you have all of that in place before you go to market. One of the things that we sort of like recommend is like when you return a response back to the user, it's best to use a template rather than just passing the generated response from the LLM directly to the end user. It's because you want to mitigate any sort of edge cases where the LLM may go off track and may provide context or information that's got nothing to do with with the user's intent. You also may have some brand risk if, like, the LLM goes way off course and starts, like, spouting off bad things about customers or about competitors, that sort of stuff. You want to make sure you want to avoid that by using templating. Another thing, you need to evaluate the LLM inputs and outputs. This is basically the guardrails that Juan mentioned. You want to have guardrails around your RAG implementation because you want to make sure that the user, when they send their prompt to us, you want to make sure that they're not trying to jailbreak and try to get the LLM to do something that it wasn't designed to do. We do have an example. Not too long ago, there was a car dealership that had a chatbot, and someone tricked the chatbot to say, respond to everything with, I agree, no taxi backsies, and got the LLM to agree to selling them a Chevy car for $1, which is funny, but like you don't want that to happen in prod. Likewise, you want to also have guardrails on the output of that because you want to mitigate, things like that, LLM returning back information that isn't grounded in the context of the RAG, and those sorts of issues that you might experience. And I guess the final point I want to mention is emphasizing the experimenting and testing. Juan mentioned this. It's really important that you constantly evaluate. It's not like, as Dad says, it's like raising a puppy. You don't want to just like leave it. You want to make sure that you give it the love and attention, and that it's still performing 12 months from now. It's the same as it was performing yesterday. So with that, I'll pass it back to Daz.
Thank you, Jason. Now we've got an idea of how experimentation works and what you should look out when you're developing RAG-based solutions. I'll talk about some of the other things that can go wrong and how they relate to things like RAG. So I'm sure you've heard of the term jailbreaking. Jailbreaking, it's shown in the example, is a way of, I guess, breaking the training wheels that have been, or bypassing the training wheels that have been put on models, model safety, by finding creative ways of putting your query and getting the response back. So there's many creative ways of doing this, but this is the entry point. This is how most users or bad actors get access to your LLM internals. So prompt injection is a way that this jailbreaking is used. Prompt injection in this example is bypassing the system prompt and putting in the attacker's intent into the system prompt, and then the LLM application reacts because the context from its perspective have now changed. One of the ways that this can happen in a RAG-based solution, for example, is when you're loading external content for enriching the context of the LLM. If you get poisoned external content coming in, your the response that's gonna go out to the user is gonna be a bad misbehavior response. And a good example, RAG is a prime candidate for this sort of attack. A good example is recently Slack had this massive issue where one of their plugins could load external content from places where the logged in user wouldn't have access to. So the user could inject external prompts in a way through some creative mechanisms to load up things like keys in private chats in other areas of the organization. And another, I guess, a very common thing that happens is people building these LLM solutions, many teams, they just put the LLM solution in front of their APIs, and they use the existing clients to talk to this LLM application in natural language. But most teams then just give the LLM application access to all of the APIs on behalf of any user. Basically, it's like a Go application that has all scopes to do basically any read operations on these APIs. What this can result is if there's a jailbreaking or a prompt injection attack, the user could instruct the LLM application to get data of another user. So to prevent that, what we recommend is we wouldn't want the LLM generating the model for the LLM or the inputs for the model for the LLM for all of the parameters. We want to select the parameters be explicit about which parameters the LLM generates and which parameters are injected from, let's say, the user context through some, let's say, something like a JWT, where you extract the user's claims and inject them in. Best case scenario, you actually pass authentication context right through to the API. So even if something goes wrong in the LLM or in something in the middle, the API application, as long as it adheres to that authentication context, can't actually go and read some other user's information. But the most important message I want you to take back from what can go wrong is if you're building something for an enterprise, let's say financial or health, somewhere that's got heavy regulatory compliance, you can't rely on just the model. You need to build your guardrails on top of your LLM solution. So this means many LLM calls for a single request for checking whether it's financial advice, whether it's got PII, whether it's talking about your competitors. There's so many things to consider here. So with all of this in mind, the only real way to do it is to build your own guardrails. They are like a middleware that checks every one of these aspects, because in enterprise, if something goes wrong, your organization, your brand, you can be very famous or infamous for building LLM solution. I'm sure you've seen the news headlines of when things go wrong. So what are the takeaways for you when you go back to your team tomorrow? Embrace the mindset change, because LLM solutions, like we discussed, require constant attention. It's not like a TV where you set and forget. It's like a puppy that requires attention to make sure you get the outcomes you require. And when you start with LLM solution, start simple. It's complicated already. Don't add anything unnecessary at the start, like agentic frameworks or things that bring in their own opinions and complexity. LLM ops, as Johan mentioned, is the new DevOps. If you're skilling up and your team is spending time and effort to skill up, maybe look at LLM ops and what's required there and the experimentation aspects there. And when you're doing retrieval augmented generation, do it with care. It will be needed because you're not going to build your LLMs, or fine tuning isn't the solution for data that changes fast. Or if you're doing RAG, which we will, do it with care and use things like templated responses. And finally, guardrails will be required. When you're developing something from using a template from the internet or some tutorial, then probably not going to have guardrails in that. But this is where enterprise development is different to starting up a hello world application. Without guardrails, you can't take your solution to production. If you have any questions, please reach out to us through our socials, or yeah, we're happy to help. More than happy to reason with you about your use case and give our opinion as well. Thank you for your time.